In the final decade of the golden age of radio, on weekday afternoons, usually at 5:30, though the time sometimes varied, children across the United States would tune their sets to their local mutual broadcasting system affiliate. Around here, that would have been station WOL out of Washington, D.C., broadcasting at 12:30 on the AM dial. If one of my grandparents had tuned in WOL at 5:30 p.m. on, say, September 5th, 1945, they would have heard this.
Kellogg's Pep, the super delicious cereal, presents The Adventures of Superman.
Faster than a speeding bullet. More powerful than a locomotive. Able to leap tall buildings at a single bound.
Look, up in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane!
It's Superman! Yes, it's Superman, and today, as we begin our brand new adventure for the Man of Steel, a cunning trap is being set for the girl reporter Lois Lane.
Yes, I realize this is obviously a modern radio that's been styled to resemble an antique one. The digital clock is a dead giveaway, huh? In fact, let me just get rid of that. It'll save me a lot of headaches when I'm editing this later. I'm not asking you to believe this is an actual radio people would have listened to in the 40s. Just do like folks who listened to radio shows back then did, and use your imagination. We take it for granted that Superman is a visual character. He originated in comic books, he's been adapted on TV and in the movies in both animated and live-action form, he's been in video games. These are all forms of media which we, among other things, look at. But in the early 1940s, Superman began drawing a large audience to follow his adventures in a medium where the only images the audience saw were the ones in their imaginations. Less than 2 years after his introduction in the pages of Action Comics #1, Superman took to the airwaves as the star of his very own radio show, The Adventures of Superman. Though it's mostly forgotten today, except by weirdos like me and presumably some of you, the radio show had a profound impact on the development of Superman in his earliest years. The audience of mostly children who gathered to listen to the series learned things about Superman's backstory, his incredible abilities, his world, his friends and enemies, and the principles that he stood for that would help to define the character from then on. It was the radio show that introduced Perry White, editor of the Daily Planet, and Cub reporter Jimmy Olsen, although an unnamed similar character who appeared earlier in the comics has since been retconned to be Jimmy, so I guess it depends on how you look at it. The character of Police Inspector Henderson, who would go on to become a recurring character on the Adventures of Superman TV series in the 1950s, was created for the radio show. It was the radio show that introduced kryptonite, the only substance capable of harming Superman. This was done to provide a pretense for Superman to be absent from the series for a few episodes, so Bud Collyer, the actor who played Superman, could have some time off every once in a while. They hadn't invented reruns yet. Not everything the radio show introduced or reinterpreted was destined to stick. The radio show originally depicted Krypton, Superman's home planet, as being located in our solar system rather than another galaxy, which has more often been the case in the comics and other adaptations. And perhaps most jarringly for modern-day fans, the first episodes of the radio show depict Superman growing to adulthood inside the rocket that carries him to Earth, meaning he isn't adopted and raised by the Kents. He just kind of lands and steps out, fully formed and ready for action, speaking English and everything. How convenient! It was also on the radio that Superman first began to fly. Sort of. Technically, in those early episodes, Superman was supposed to be leaping great distances, like he did in the comics the first couple of years, but on the radio, his mighty leaps were accompanied by a distinctive whooshing sound effect, as though the wind were racing past. Plus, there was the phrasing of that narration that opened every episode.
Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman.
A bird, a plane, they don't leap. They soar. And in the imaginations of most radio listeners, so did Superman. The series was popular, more popular than Mutual, its network, realized at first. Mutual actually canceled the series in March 1942, and public outcry was so overwhelming that the show was back on the air by the end of August. When the show was revived following that first cancellation, the writers took the opportunity to change that bit about Superman emerging from his rocket ship fully grown. I guess even they realized how weird it was. They made him the adopted son of the Kents, just as he was in the comics. For most of its run, episodes of Adventures of Superman were 15 minutes long and aired 5 times a week, Monday through Friday, in the late afternoon, so kids could catch it after school. Stories were serialized, sometimes continuing for dozens of episodes, most of which ended on cliffhangers to make sure the audience would be back in front of the radio the next day to hear the continuation. The stories were mostly typical adventure fiction. Superman battled crime syndicates and crooked politicians and malevolent aliens and mad scientists. This one time, Jimmy Olsen and Perry White's personal chef, an alien named Poco, fought Nazis at the North Pole. This other time, Jimmy and Poco went to the moon on a radar rocket, and Superman had to fly to the moon to rescue them. It happens. But of all those stories, the most highly regarded, most important, and best remembered is the one that ran for 16 episodes during the summer of 1946. In it, Superman and his friends face a different kind of enemy. Not a kryptonite-powered supervillain or an extraterrestrial invader. A far more grounded and, unfortunately, far more human threat. A hate group called the Clan of the Fiery Cross. The producers of The Adventures of Superman were contacted by Stetson Kennedy, an author and civil rights activist who had worked for several years in the organized labor movement and written articles opposing racist voter suppression policies, such as poll taxes. Kennedy and his associates had managed to infiltrate the Ku Klux Klan in the state of Georgia and had learned much about the Klan's organizational structure and activities, including its closely guarded secret rituals. Kennedy passed on this information to law enforcement, including the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and evidence he and his informants provided aided in the prosecutions and convictions of members of the Klan and other hate groups. But in reaching out to the producers of The Adventures of Superman, Kennedy had another broader goal in mind. He wanted to use the radio show to expose and embarrass the Klan before an audience of millions of young Americans. The storyline that resulted pulled no punches when it came to dramatizing the beliefs and activities of the Klan. The Clan of the Fiery Cross is depicted unambiguously as a gang of ignorant thugs. The individual members, including their leader, Grand Scorpion Matt Riggs, are gullible, fearful petty criminals with delusions of grandeur who are motivated by imaginary grievances against immigrants and racial minorities. But the threat they present, especially if they or people like them should ever be allowed to gain power and influence, and what are the odds that could happen, is shown to be very serious. The inciting incident of the story occurs when Chuck, the young nephew of Grand Scorpion Riggs, is kicked off his youth baseball team after fighting with the team's new star pitcher, Tommy Lee, who is the son of Chinese immigrants. When Chuck's Uncle Matt hears the story, he convinces Chuck to exaggerate what happened, to make it seem like Tommy vindictively hit him with a pitch during practice, and pressures Chuck to tell the story to his fellow members at an emergency meeting of the Clan of the Fiery Cross. Convinced on the basis of this scuffle between two children that the Lees and other immigrants are embarking on a campaign to replace white people, the Klan carries out a cross-burning at the Lees' home. Things only escalate from there. Tommy Lee is later abducted by the Klan, breaking his arm while attempting to escape, thus ending his hopes of helping his team win the local baseball championship. Eventually, Jimmy Olsen, manager of the baseball team, and Perry White, who has used the Daily Planet as a platform to rally the public against the Klan and attempt to expose its secret members, are also abducted and nearly killed by the Klan before Superman flies into the rescue. Before all is said and done, Superman also foils an assassination attempt by the Grand Scorpion against Mr. White, Jimmy, and Chuck, who turns on his uncle and helps Superman find and round up the Klan. Throughout the story, the message sent to the show's young audience by the characters and the often blunt narration is clear. The members of the Klan are misguided, cowardly hate-mongers, and their beliefs are ignorant, undemocratic, and un-American. More than once, the Klan is directly equated with the Nazis, a comparison that must have carried even more weight in 1946, not even a year removed from the end of World War II, than it does today. Not all of the story's messaging is so overt, though. Listening to the Clan of the Fiery Cross storyline recently to prepare for this video, I especially appreciated the characterization of Perry White. Despite passionately denouncing the Klan and mobilizing the resources of the Daily Planet to fight it, Perry also consistently shrugs off the threat they present to him personally. Even after he and Jimmy have been abducted by the Klan, Perry insists that they aren't in any real danger. "They're just trying to scare us, Jim," he says. "They wouldn't dare do anything to really harm us." But the danger posed by the Klan is real, and the show makes it clear that it should be taken seriously, both within the fiction of the show and in the real world. Intolerance is presented as such an urgent threat that Superman is forced to confront it multiple times throughout the series. Earlier, in 1946, only a few weeks prior to the start of the Clan of the Fiery Cross story, in fact, the show presented a 25-part series titled The Hate Mongers Organization, in which the villain is a bigot who is opposing the construction of the Unity House, the interfaith community center that is also central to the events of the Clan of the Fiery Cross serial. While Clan of the Fiery Cross deals primarily with anti-immigrant sentiment and racism, the Hate Mongers organization focuses more on religious bigotry, particularly anti-Semitism. Then, in September of 1946, just 2 months after the conclusion of the Clan of the Fiery Cross, the series presented the 17-part series George Latimer, Crooked Political Boss, which sees Superman and his friends working to expose racial and religious discrimination in the awarding of state jobs. Consider those stories, plus the epic trilogy of serials, The Scarlet Widow, The Atom Man, and The Atom Man in Metropolis, that ran for a total of 49 consecutive episodes from September through December of 1945, where Superman battles his greatest single foe of the radio series, the Atom Man, who is, a Nazi. And it becomes obvious how important it was to the creators of The Adventures of Superman to use their show to instill the values of tolerance and respect for diversity in their young audience. That doesn't mean the show isn't obviously a product of its time. Its heart is in the right place, and the good far outweighs the bad, but listen to enough episodes and you'll hear racially insensitive portrayals of Asian characters, even the occasional racial slur, used by a character who is in the middle of a crusade against prejudice and intolerance. The blind spots are much easier to see in hindsight than they were at the time, I suppose. And, like nearly all popular media at the time, the series is almost exclusively white male-centered. Lois Lane is often a character on the show in theory only. She vanishes for long stretches at a time, and when she does show up, is referred to condescendingly as a girl reporter. Typical for the era, but unfortunate nonetheless. One of the most important changes Gene Luen Yang made to the story of Clan of the Fiery Cross when he adapted it into the comic book miniseries Superman Smashes the Klan, the subject of the previous video in this series, was to center the story on the Lees, the family targeted by the terrorism of the Klan. The Lees are in the original radio story, but only serve to provide Superman someone to fight on behalf of. The story isn't actually about them, which feels wrong from our somewhat more enlightened modern perspective. Despite those shortcomings, the Adventures of Superman radio show frequently manages to be startlingly ahead of its time. It's bolder and more fearless in its promotion of progressive values and social justice than most popular stories are today, especially within the superhero genre. But its appeal doesn't depend exclusively on its political messaging. It also features one of my favorite characterizations of Superman himself. The Man of Steel's radio incarnation is a tireless champion of equality and human rights, but that doesn't mean he's about to take any shit. He's got a bit of pulp detective in him, with a rougher edge than we're used to from more modern versions of the character. Sometimes he even comes across as severe and unforgiving. He talks tough when it's called for, and acts that way too. For example, take this exchange. One of my favorite moments from the radio show. It's from the concluding chapter of the Hate Mongers organization story when Superman has apprehended Frank Hill, the leader of the gang, the chief hate monger, so to speak, and Hill has the bright idea to try to make a run for it while Superman is on the phone with Inspector Henderson. Listen.
Just a minute, Inspector. Superman wants to talk to you.
Thanks, Jim. Hello, Inspector. Oh, I'm fine, thanks. Jimmy and I are at the headquarters of that Guardians of America outfit. We've collared 3 of them, including the big shot.
Superman, Hill's trying to get away.
Hold it, Inspector. No, you don't, Hill.
Let go of me.
I'll let go with this.
Jeepers, you knocked him cold.
Unfortunately, he'll live. Hello, Inspector. Sorry for the interruption. No, nothing important. Frank Hill, the leader of this rat's nest, decided he wanted to take a nap, and I had to rock him to sleep.
We can detect echoes of this Superman in his successor on the Adventures of Superman television series, particularly the characterization of Clark Kent. On the radio, as he would be on TV in the 1950s, Clark is described by other characters as the meek and cowardly, mild-mannered reporter, but almost always acts like a serious and competent investigative journalist, albeit one with a penchant for slips of the tongue that nearly give his secret identity away. The Clark Kent, played by George Reeves on TV, is practically indistinguishable from the one portrayed by Bud Collyer on the radio, although Reeves' Superman isn't quite as hard-nosed as Collier's. Generally speaking, I prefer a less pugnacious Superman. If I were writing the character, he would probably be kinder and gentler as far as his interpersonal relations go. But there is something appealing and also inspiring about an all-business Superman, whose business is truth and justice. The Superman of the radio show doesn't just stand against hatred and intolerance and exploitation. He gets mad about it. He has no patience for it or for the people who seek to perpetuate it. And when he speaks to his young audience on the subject, he does so with directness and clarity.
Fellas and girls, our President Truman has given this week a special name, Brotherhood Week. And that name has a special meaning for every one of us. You know, our weapon that helped most to win the war was the spirit of unity. Everybody pitched in and cooperated with everybody else like brothers. Nowadays, that same spirit is just as important to help keep our country the kind we want to grow up in. Actually, hate hurts no one but ourselves. But tolerance, the attitude of looking for the good that's in every person, regardless of race, creed, or national background, can help a lot to make each one of us really strong in character and to make our whole nation strong. So let's go all out for real, honest-to-goodness teamwork. That will help make America greater than ever before.
Make America greater than ever before. I definitely prefer that to that other line. Speaking of variations on famous lines, most Superman fans know the classic description of him that the announcer reads at the beginning of the Fleischer cartoons and the George Reeves TV series. There are multiple versions, but they usually include something about him being a strange visitor from another planet with powers and abilities far beyond those of mortal men, and how he fights a never-ending battle for truth and justice, or truth, justice, and the American way, as the TV show puts it. The radio show uses several versions of that intro over the years. Here's my favorite variation.
Yes, it's Superman, strange visitor from another planet, who came to Earth with powers and ability far beyond those of mortal men. Superman, defender of law and order, champion of equal rights, valiant, courageous fighter against the forces of hate and prejudice.
These days, the phrase law and order has a well-earned stink on it, but the rest of that sure sounds like my Superman. Champion of equal rights, valiant, courageous fighter against the forces of hate and prejudice. That's describing a character who not only was a role model to millions of kids in post-war America, but one who deserved to be. Just like he deserves to be a part of any conversation where the subject is the best Superman ever.